or information security or IT security. This cyber word, it's come along in about the last 10 years or so, I would say. It's made security somewhat more interesting for everybody. Suddenly, cyber security sounds like something other people want to take an interest in. It's made the topic sexy. So what are my credentials in this area? Well, I've written, apparently, over 350 referee papers, 360, in fact, it says there. Why does that matter? Well, that means other people have reviewed them and thought they were worth publishing. You can go and read some of them yourselves and see if those people were right. I would question it. I'm the editor of something called Information and Computer Security, so no cyber word in there, but it covers pretty much the same sort of areas. The board member of something called the Chartered Institute of Information Security. That's a professional body in the UK, which again is concerned with cyber security as well, even though it says information in the title. I'm working with, now we find the word cyber coming up. I'm a member of a working group, the UK Cyber Security Council, looking at careers and learning. That's another umbrella organisation that's been set up in the UK to look at the professionalism of cyber security. I'm a UK rep to something called ICOCO Technical Committee 11. Hands up if you've heard of ICOCO. One person. Okay. Shy. Now, so many people haven't heard of IFIT, but IFIT is the International Federation for Information Processing. And it's the organization, it's like an umbrella organization to which national computing societies might belong. So in the UK, for example, our BCS, which used to be the British Computer Society, now calls itself BCS, the Chartered Institute for IT. That's a member society of IFIT. Technical Committee 11, it might not surprise you to know, is all about security and privacy, so I'm the UK rep into that committee. And I'm also a contributor to something called the DSIT Cybersecurity Breaches Survey. What's DSIT, you might be wondering? Let's see if I can remember. It's the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology, so it's one of the government departments in the UK, and since 2016, this Cybersecurity Breaches Survey has been released. Prior to that, just as a secret, it was the Information Security Breaches Survey for some time before, but that's cyber, so it's more interesting. And why am I mentioning all of this, or any of this? Well, I'm mentioning most of it, just so you think I've got some sort of credentials to be stood up here talking about cyber security, because I might lose the credibility as we go through the talk and when you ask me questions. And the last bit, because I'm going to draw upon that survey quite extensively in what I talk about in the scene setting. Okay, now, another bit of scene setting, you might not have noticed this bit already. Come on, there we go, now it's slowing down, we're going back. Right, technology area. Where I'm from. Now, okay, you probably knew because you've told. I'm from the UK. I'm from Nottingham, which is, no, not that. Hold on. Let's share the screen again. I'll sing for you. It'll be musical, but it won't be. Let's play this again. Share that again. Get out of that. Of course, you have to say share again when it's actually sharing. Where is it? Oh, dear. Not working? Down to. Lovely. Right. This time, I'll remember that the laser pointer, for those of you in the room, sorry for those online, you won't even get to see this, the laser pointer's there. And that's where I'm from. Trying to match my little red dot with the other red dot. That's Nottingham. That, in the top left, is London. That's a bit of the UK you'll recognise. Yes, a flag, got a big clock thing called the Elizabeth Tower, with a bell in it called Big Ben. So the tower's not called Big Ben. That is Nottingham city centre. That is Robin Hood. You heard of Robin Hood? He's our local hero in Nottingham. Stole from people, very heroic. And that's my university campus. My building's just about there. And so Sugar's been there, sugar. It's very nice, isn't it? When the sun shines. Now, why am I telling you all this? Because I'm going to be drawing upon quite a bit of evidence from the UK. Okay, so all this stuff from the Cybersecurity Breaches Survey and other things that I'll draw upon are UK studies. I'm aware that the UK is not the only country in the world, but nonetheless, there's some evidence here that will be quite useful in setting the scene on what's happening within small and medium organisations. And I think that actually a lot of what I talk about is going to be true for SMEs internationally anyway. But my evidence, because I'm from the UK, is UK based. So, to set the scene a little bit more then, so in the UK, we have about 5.5 million small and medium organisations. And they account for 99.9, it's quite precise really, 99.9% of businesses that exist. So there's a lot of them, and they're a significant contributor to the business economy. They generate 3/5 of the employment and a combined turnover in the UK of £2.3 billion. Okay? So ultimately, what that means is they matter. We care about them. They're important to society, to the country, to the economy, and a significant asset. And therefore, as an asset, we need to protect them. However, as I've already mentioned, SMEs aren't necessarily well positioned to protect themselves compared to large organisations that might have an in-house cyber security, or even information security, or even information assurance capability. SMEs quite often won't have even significant IT and general computing expertise, but they'll nonetheless be using the technology in some form. About half, according to the Cybersecurity Breaches Survey, about half of them outsource their security. So they entrust the handling of the security, the provision of it, to an external provider, which is fine, I guess, because they then think, okay, somebody else is handling it for us, we don't have to know about it ourselves. But even that consideration, they need to know basically what they're choosing. They need to ensure that what they're selecting as their service provider is actually managing and handling the right things for them. So you still need a little bit of knowledge, ideally, to make an informed choice. Others might be reliant on whatever in-house knowledge they have, which might not extend very far. And then another proportion might not really be doing anything about it, might just be hoping that security doesn't become a problem for them. Now, another study from the UK, I shall briefly diverge away from the Cybersecurity Breaches Survey and talk about another one. This is cybersecurity skills in the UK labour market. So this is another study that's been run for a number of years now. You can hopefully get this freely available online if you want to see more details. But what it tells us is that regardless of their size, 50%, half that is by my maths, just in case you're wondering, 50% of businesses have a basic skills gap in relation to dealing with cyber security. So around 740,000 businesses that represents. And that basically means, or, well, what are the basic skills? Things like configuring firewalls, detecting and removing malware, choosing secure settings for the systems that they've got. About half of them don't feel competent in doing that sort of thing. So the more advanced cybersecurity activities, so proper threat detection, incident response, things of that nature, they're likely to be even less well positioned there. So the gap is lower, according to the survey, if you look at large businesses. So there, it's only 18%. The survey doesn't directly report what the gap is in small and micro organisations, but we can infer from those results that if it's only 18% in large businesses and it's 50% on average, it's going to be worse in smaller organisations. So we conclude then that many SMEs are, as I was suggesting, ill-positioned to address their own cybersecurity needs. So it leaves them dependent on further support if something happens, if they encounter an incident, if they need to make related decisions, or indeed if they've just got questions and concerns about cybersecurity because they've heard somebody at an event saying that cybersecurity might be important to them. Okay, so I mentioned already, my main source for this is the Cybersecurity Breaches Survey 2023. Any of you that do that young person thing of holding up your phone and taking a picture of a QR code, you can do that now and it will link you to that particular survey. So if you wanted to see what the survey is, there's the URL, there's a QR code that hopefully points to it. You always exercise caution when you scan QR codes. You don't know where it could be pointing you off to. Could be a gallery of my personal pictures, but it's not. You'll say. So there we are. Now, for the people online, lots of people in the audience are now doing what I suggested and taking pictures of a QR code. It's very exciting and interactive stuff. Right, I shall spam on until people's phones go down. Okay. So this breaches survey, what does it actually tell us then about breaches? This, I suppose, is the headline news from the survey. So it says that 32% of businesses and 24% of charities, because the survey looked at them as well, have identified what the breaches survey calls breaches or attacks in the last 12 months. Now, I always feel obliged to have a little bit of a moment at this point about how they actually represent this, because breaches and attacks aren't necessarily the same thing. You can have a breach that didn't relate or result from an attack, and you can have an attack that doesn't become a breach. And so we're not actually clear from the way it's reported here what 32% of businesses actually encountered. But they've had some sort of incident, let's call it that, and that's a nice more general word. They've had a discernible cybersecurity incident that they remembered well enough when they were then asked to respond to a survey about it, to say, yes, we've had something that happened to us that we associated with cybersecurity. And then there's an eyesight test for those of us in the room, including me, even though I'm stood closest to it. We've got the chart, which tells us what some of the actual incidents were. And the topmost one, for both the businesses and the charities, is related to phishing. Okay, so how many of you have had a phishing experience? Not necessarily asking if you've fallen for it and provided your login details, or indeed shook all the bad rules or anybody else's to it. Hands up high though if you've encountered phishing recently. Let's even see. That's not that many. I mean, I quite often see these messages. They come along. I don't respond to them. I forward them to my colleague Nathan down provides his details. But phishing is commonly encountered, and some organisations, some individuals, they certainly do fall for it. What else have we got? Other impersonation of the organisation in emails and online, and then the next one down, the third one, far fewer saying they've experienced it, but viruses and other forms of malicious code, and then further down again you've got ransomware being particularly called out. Okay, so all of these are less than, or less prevalent, shall we say, than phishing, but you can imagine that the impacts of some of these other types of incidents could be more significant if they were to occur. Okay, so that is from a total population in the survey of 887 businesses that had identified some sort of breach in the last breach or attack in the last 12 months. Now, we'll go into a little bit more detail later about how that breaks down in terms of size of organisations, to show that the small organisations are significant amongst that as well. But one of the headline findings from the survey this year related to the extent to which organisations were following basic cybersecurity hygiene practices. So I mentioned earlier about this gap in terms of basic skills. Well, another thing is, well, okay, whether they got the skills or not, what are they actually doing in terms of some of the fundamentals of security to safeguard themselves? And well, the proportion of micro businesses, so this in UK parlance, a micro business is something with 10 or fewer employees, or fewer than 10, let's say. The proportion of those saying that cybersecurity is a high priority for them has fallen from 80% in the previous year down to 68% this year. Okay, so it's still the vast majority, or the significant majority, but it's a notable drop. So, yeah, these very small organisations say, well, security isn't so high on their list of priorities as it was even a year ago. Basic cybersecurity hygiene practices as well have fallen, and notably, as it says at the bottom, not in the context of large organisations. So all these drops are motivated by the medium, small and micro organisation respondents, not by large ones. But these are the overall figures from the survey. So use of password policies, 79% in 2001, down to 70% this year. Use of firewalls, dropped about 12% as well. Restriction of admin rights, so you have appropriate control over who accesses what within the system at the administrative level. That's dropped from 75 to 67. And software updates, timely application of software updates, applying patches within 14 days. has dropped from 43% to 31%, so only a third compared to almost a half a couple of years ago. Another opportunity for you to put your hands up, ladies and gentlemen. How many of you apply software updates, critical security patches within a couple of weeks of them being launched? And sheepishly, about a third of the hands are gone. I'm just reporting for people online, a third of the hands went up. I hope everybody online was putting their hands up and saying, we were, weren't we? Good. I'll trust that we were. So, if these things aren't being done, well, it basically leaves things more vulnerable. So more chance if an incident occurs that it could actually become a breach. Okay, whether it's an attack or whether it's an accidental thing or an inadvertent thing. So let's remember that cybersecurity incidents don't just occur from attacks and hacks. The breaches survey tends to focus its attention around things like malware and phishing and deliberate attacks. But you have accidental things as well, where somebody attaches the wrong file to an email and may expose sensitive data, you have an accident, or you have hardware device failures, environmental incidents. All of these sort of things can compromise your security as well. So you need things like backup and other safeguards to make sure your systems remain available, you have continuity. I keep doing this hands up thing, but I'm so tempted to do it. How many of you back up your data? How many of you have backed up your data, including if it's on cloud? Still, if you turn around, there's still not that many hands, even with cloud being included. How many of you got data you care about? This side of the room, only you care about your data. Nobody else cares. All right, so hand over your data at the end of the session. We'll have a look and see what it's like. Okay. So let's break it down a little bit by size, where the breaches survey allows us to do so. Let's see who's doing what. And what we generally tend to see, perhaps unsurprisingly, is large businesses are better positioned in relation to all these cybersecurity things. So here we've got a couple of things that organisations could do, which I would say are sort of, vaguely fundamental things when you think about it. So a formal policy covering your cybersecurity risks. That's the dark blue one. So overall, a third, 29% of organisations do or have this. And if you look at large businesses, it's 79%. And then as the size goes down, you get fewer and fewer organisations that have actually got this formal policy. So if you take just the small businesses, for example, so those between around 10 and 50 employees, less than half. Business continuity plans that cover cybersecurity. So having thought ahead about what you're going to do in the event of something disruptive happening. Again, large organisations, it's about the same, and it sort of tracks through to the other organisations as well. So generally, the smaller you are, the less likely you are to have done one of these preparatory things. There's also, and again, this is using UK examples, things that SMEs could usefully be aware of to help guide them and to help guide their staff, their employees, etc. So 3 different things that apply at different levels, if you like. So we've got cyber aware. Now, this is something that speaks to us as individuals. It's guidance on basic cybersecurity practices, so choosing strong passwords, backing up data, things of that nature that individuals could do typically on their own devices, but some of it would also apply in the context of workplaces as well. And certainly, if the organisation isn't taking care of itself, at least getting its staff up to a basic level of awareness could be useful. Something called the 10 steps to cybersecurity. We'll come to that a little bit in a moment and actually look at what it is, but just to break the surprise, there's 10 different steps and they relate to cybersecurity. And something called cyber essentials, which is basically 5 areas of security control relating to online systems. So by addressing these 5 areas of control for your systems that are connected to the internet, you'll be safeguarding them against a significant proportion of the common threats, is the idea. Now, all of these are things that have been generated, recommended by our National Cybersecurity Centre in the UK. And Cyber Essentials is the one out of the 3 where an organisation can be assessed and certified to be compliant with it. And if they meet that standard, then they get to use that logo and to say they're compliant with Cyber Essentials. And there are certainly, particularly government contracts in the UK, that look for organisations to be able to say, we've got cyber essentials to give a level of confidence for people to deal with them. Okay. Now, those are things that organisations could be aware of. This is the extent to which the breaches survey tells us they are actually aware of them. So 14% have heard of the Cyber Essentials Scheme. Now, the Cyber Essentials Scheme has been running for about a decade now, and there's not a huge amount of awareness of it. We'll be doing something to try and boost awareness of that as part of some research I shall tell you about as we go through. The 10 steps to cyber security, unless I've made a mistake in looking at the survey, is exactly the same. 14% say they've heard of it. And the Cyber Aware campaign, well, just over a quarter are aware of Cyber Aware. So overall, that's not a great degree of awareness. Right? And if we break this down by size, and again, the breaches survey doesn't tell us specifically what the small organisations look like, but it does tell us what the large and the mediums look like. We can see that the level of awareness is greater, again, based on the size of organisations. So where they've got perhaps more dedicated cyber security people responding to the survey, and at least they're aware of these things. Okay, so I said we talk about the 10 steps to cyber security. Here they are in what appears to me to be microscopic detail. So this is well, what would you call it? The infographic, I mean, if that's the right word for this, from the National Cyber Security Centre, and it gives you a brief outline of what each of these 10 steps are. Now, for the benefit of those people in the room sat far away, and for the benefit of me to remember, I shall read out at least the names of these things. It'll be very exciting for the people online, you can read it quite easily already. So we've got risk management, we've got engagement and training, we've got asset management, architecture and configuration, vulnerability management, identity and access management, data security, logging and monitoring, incident management, and supply chain security. That's 10 different areas of cyber security that these 10 steps recommend that organisations ought to be giving some attention to. Now, if you look at those list of 10 things, instinctively, I guess, there aren't really any of those. Perhaps supply chain security, you might think, well, does that have anything to do with my organisation? If you don't think you've got a supply chain, maybe you want to look again and see if you have, but maybe you don't unless you're a larger organisation, but you still might be part of somebody else's supply chain. But everything else there, to some degree, I would say there is a relevance for organisations. You know, should you be thinking about managing your risk? Should you be thinking about awareness and training for your users? Should you recognise what assets you've got within your organisation that need protection? Should you be managing vulnerabilities? Should you be doing something about identity and access management? I think the answer is yes to all of these sort of things, to some degree. However, the extent to which businesses have done some of these things seems to be variable. Now, I should explain this chart because you might immediately think, well, how could, what is it there? 89% of large businesses, for example, have undertaken 5 or more of the 10 steps if 89% of businesses weren't aware of the 10 steps of cyber security. The way that we've done this within the survey is to look at their responses to other questions and to see if those responses suggest a key step having been taken towards some of these 10 steps principles. Even if they weren't explicitly aware of the 10 steps, have they done something that actually serves the purpose? So are they, for example, aware of the assets that they've got? Do they have a record of assets? Are they monitoring their wider supply chain in terms of supply chain security? Are they doing some basic configuration things in relation to their system? And so that's how we've got to these numbers. And so, having undertaken 5 or more of those previous 10 steps, well, okay, large businesses do pretty well there. 89% of them have done at least half of the things. But when we go down to the smaller organisations, we can see that it's less prominent there. But having done all of the 10 steps, and not to have done all of the 10 steps fully, to have taken a key step against each of the 10 steps, not many businesses have done that overall, just 2%, okay, because the sample is quite skewed towards small and medium organisations. And only 20% of the large organisations sort of get worried about what these large organisations might be doing if they've not done a fundamental thing in each of these 10 cases. And what do the individual steps look like? So, okay, that was the on average thing. Here's where the steps are taken more or less prominently. So the only two, I've coloured them in green to show that they're the ones that are being done a bit better. The architecture and configuration and data security ones are the ones that score the best. And architecture and configuration, the way we measured this one is there were 7 fundamental, 7 things technically and configuration-wise that organisations could be doing. So, for example, dealing with or having properly configured firewalls, having isolated wireless networks for their organisation. And we gave them a mark for compliance for this if they were doing at least 3 out of the 7. Okay, so some of them might not apply to all organisations. And data security, that was basically they got a tick in the box if they had a backup of some description, including on the cloud. And so we say, okay, most organisations think they've got backup covered to some degree. Other things, let's pick engagement and training, for example, where only 18% of organisations are compliant. What we were looking for compliance there was, have they done any training or awareness for their general staff community about cybersecurity in the last year? And only 18% have done so. And so you begin to wonder about how cybersecurity aware or compliant people might be within these organisations if they've not had some sort of support to understand the issues within the last 12 months from their organisation. And again, if we break it down by size of organisation, again, the overall versus the medium and the large, we can see that large organisations are on average doing better, but even there, the picture is still discernibly mixed. But again, what we can infer from that, and we saw it from the earlier chart as well, is that smaller organisations will be doing less of this. Now, if you look at the NCSC, the National Cybersecurity Centre's website, about the 10 steps, they will make a statement on there saying it's more suited to medium and large organisations. But I would say some of these fundamental steps are actually quite applicable to smaller organisations as well. So, I suppose the question is, does it matter? And perhaps these small organisations aren't doing some of these things because they don't need to. Well, let's remember and go back to now have a breakdown of we saw earlier that 32% of organisations or businesses overall experience a breach. Here's how it breaks down in terms of the size. So 31% of micro organisations have encountered some sort of incident that they remembered and reflected in the survey. 32%, so bang on the overall average for small businesses, and medium a bit larger and larger businesses a bit more again. So again, we don't know necessarily, we can't explain some of the details of this, but we can't gather it from just this chart. We don't know if it's because the larger organisations are just monitoring the situation better and therefore note some of these incidents, or indeed whether they were having more incidents than the smaller ones in the first place. Nonetheless, what it shows us is smaller organisations are not immune from incidents occurring, and so the level of protection they've got, they could probably do with more. Another thing that we did, this is a little bit earlier, this relates to a study published at the end of 2002, but the work was undertaken in the early part of last year. Actually looking a little bit deeper into the actual breach experiences in different types of organisations. It's essentially 10 case studies, some covering micro organisation all the way through to large ones. And basically what was done was at least 2 employees per organisation were interviewed. So you had somebody who was in the IT or cybersecurity role and somebody who was, if you like, in the management level of the organisation, so CEO, finance officer, somebody like that, who was impacted by whatever breach had occurred. Well, yes, and I'm putting that up because it shows I was one of the contributors to this study, so I've got the right to use the information. So, what did it cover in summary? So, 10 organisations in total, 1 micro, 2 small, 3 medium, 4 large organisations, and that adds up to 10, that's quite good. Types of breaches that they encountered. There were 3 denial of services, 3 ransomwares, 3 instances, there we go, of spear phishing, and 1 of smishing. So phishing via SMS. And different types of impact, all of them had a financial impact related to them. 4 had an impact in relation to customer dissatisfaction. 4 caused employee stress, dissatisfaction, or attrition. And 2 of them caused reputational damage to the organisation. So a range of different things being represented in the study. Now, if you go and download the study itself, you'll see 10 different numbered case studies. They are not in order of organisation size or anything like that. So when I go to the next slide, and it's got a case study number or whatever, it's not that I'm getting the numbers wrong in the order of the slide, I'm relating it to what's in the report for you. So in each case study, it's describing what the cybersecurity posture was before a breach occurred. It's talking about what happened and the immediate response of the organisation, how it impacted the organisation, and then what was done as a consequence. In a sense, what did the organisation, if anything, learn from the breach? So a few examples, and we're going hopefully from micro organisation through to large. And so the fact that I've got case study 5 here is that's what it's numbered in the booklet itself. So if you go and look at it. So it's a micro organisation with less than 10 employees. It experienced a denial of service attack, and it had 3 levels or 3 forms of impact: financial, dissatisfaction of customers, and some reputational damage. Now, in terms of the lessons learned or the outcomes, and I should say the reason I'm showing you this is just to basically reinforce this point, that incident, breaches, attacks happen to organisations of all sizes. But as you'll see from some of these, their level of response and their ability to do something about it sometimes tends to vary. So what was the micro-organisation able to do as a result of this denial of service? Well, it purchased a new firewall. It was blocking IP addresses as a result. The managing director, I like this one, imposed an unofficial policy that all employees should go to them before opening any strange-looking emails. Now, how well do you think that's likely to have worked in practice? Would you go to your managing director before opening a strange-looking email? Hands up? No, nobody. What's a strange-looking email? Well, is it strange enough to contact the MD? Let's forward it to them and see if they open it. And they go. It's a bit of a strange reaction, and again, perhaps sort of suggesting that the level of support and level of knowledge within a micro-organisation isn't as good as it might be. And they didn't take any further action because they didn't have the funds for it. They didn't have any further cybersecurity training for the staff, and no further investment in the hardware or software to protect themselves. So limited ability to do something. Case study 1 was a small organisation, so between 10 and 49 staff. It was a spear phishing one. It had a financial impact and some either employee stress, dissatisfaction, or attrition of the employees. What did they do? Well, here it seems to have had a positive impact in the sense that it made the organisation more vigilant, especially at the senior management level, and it prompted it to review cybersecurity arrangements and support. They got a new IT provider, they implemented MFA, and introduced a means to send phishing messages to screen. So a tangible increase in their security posture as a result of a breach occurring. And they're working towards, well, I mentioned Cyber Essentials. They're working towards Cyber Essentials Plus. Must be better. So what that means is, and I'll introduce Cyber Essentials a bit more fully as we go through. Cyber Essentials, the standard one, an organisation does a self-assessment against these 5 areas of control, and then somebody else externally validates that that self-assessment seems to have been done credibly. Cyber Essentials Plus, somebody external comes in and does the actual assessment, and so it's a more rigorous and harder to achieve baseline. Okay, so the 6 going up in size, medium organisation, it was ransomware, financial customer dissatisfaction, reputational damage. So there was again a positive development here, a changing culture, said the IT manager. Before, I was a man who made it difficult to do things. Now people understand what they're paying for in terms of why the IT manager exists. Most significant change with Microsoft are now managing more of the services. And the major risk we're left with is user risk, because everything else is managed by Microsoft. Maybe a bit of a broad assumption there, but user risk is still something quite considerable to have to deal with. Didn't say whether they were. And then finally, the large organisation had a denial of service, similar range of impacts. And they did quite a few things. I won't read all of the bits through. We've upgraded a lot. We're now on a par, if not ahead of the competition, they said at the end. So we've seen all of the organisations having some sort of response, but the larger organisation here doing perhaps more than the others were able to do. Some observations other than it affects organisations of all sizes, not just relevant to that, is that if you read the various case studies more fully, you'll notice a lot of them in the pre-breach situation were considering that they were likely to be better protected than other people in their sector. They all seem to think, well, we might not be perfect, but we're likely to be better than our competitors and others, etc. So perhaps this notion of wishful thinking should be an 11th step to cybersecurity, because a lot of organisations seem to think that that's what they're going to get by on. And it also illustrates that actually how you compare to somebody else isn't really the point. You need to be protected to an appropriate level for your organisation, your systems, your risk. There was notable variability in the extent that the victims were able to, and even if they tried, to quantify the cost of the incidents. And again, the larger organisations, I think, were generally better able to do so. And yeah, the organisation generally seemed to respond positively, and they did learn relevant lessons, but were, again, perhaps size limited in what they could do. So, all of this stuff sort of points towards SMEs are not ideally positioned in terms of where they could be with cybersecurity. So there's a potential question about, well, what do they do? What can they do in the event of needing support? So they might, as I've mentioned before, they might have questions about cybersecurity, they might have concerns, they might want advice, they might want recommendations, they might have experienced an incident. Where do they actually look? What are the options available to them? So one of the options, of course, is just to go and try and find something online. So do a search using Google or Bing or some other search engine that you don't use, to see, okay, cybersecurity, SMEs, guidance, some search like that, and what would they find? So doing it in the UK context, one of the things they might find is something called the NCSC Small Business Guide, because it's there, and it's a guide for small businesses about cybersecurity. If we look at the breaches survey, however, we can see that over the years, and it would be sort of similar if the guide existed and you went back further, it hasn't really changed in terms of the level of awareness. Very few organisations know that that guide exists. Okay? If they were to find it, here's one of the, or here are the key things it would tell them about. Step one, backing up your data, that thing that all of you put your hands up, don't it? So first step, back up your data. It matters to you because you're an organisation. No matter how big you are, your data is a very significant asset. If you lose your data, you're not doing very much business, I would suggest. Protecting your organisation from malware, keeping your smartphones and tablets safe. Why do we highlight those specifically? Because perhaps, as this technology has crept in, it's a significant part of our IT estate now, but it's not the laptop or the desktop that the organisation considers to be the IT, the technology that people are using. But of course, there's lots of personally owned smartphones in particular that might still have company data on them, so we don't want to overlook those. Use passwords to protect your data, or indeed use better security than passwords, and avoid phishing attacks. Just avoid them, please. And if you read this further, it will give you some tips on how to do. So this is how the Small Business Guide couches its guidance for SMEs. 5 steps, those things. However, the same web search that would have shown this up would also have shown this from BSI, the British Standards Institute, which is grouped differently, has a number of different sub-points within it. It's all, again, relevant guidance for SMEs. So some of it's covering the same thing, but some of it's a broader canvas. I'm not going to read out all of these, but what you immediately see is an SME that doesn't know what it ought to be looking at is going to find immediately 2 different messages about what security should be for them. And indeed, they might find other guidance. So here was another prominent result in the same search. Forbes, it's not actually guidance, it's more of an article discussing particular themes in cybersecurity. So acquire cyber assurance, it's probably sponsored by a cyber insurance company. AI is happening. Who knew? Hands up, who knew AI was happening? So this isn't really actionable guidance. These are issues to be aware of, perhaps, in some cases. But again, it's Mind your business. That's a useful bit of guidance, isn't it? It's not framed in the same way. It's talking about, again, a different potential set of things. I don't think any of the other guidance talks specifically about cyber insurance or calls out AI as a particular issue. It's not to say it's not relevant, but again, as an SME trying to understand what's my landscape, what do I need to care about, three not entirely compatible sets of information, even within the first sort of page of results, shall we say. So having looked at that, even to try and understand it, let alone to then try and take action against it, how does our SME feel? Are they happy and green, or are they red and sad or frustrated? And more particularly, has their security been improved as a result of trying to look at any of this? And I think in some cases, the answer is going to be no. In some cases, they won't have understood what the guidance was trying to tell them. And even if they did, okay, it says we need to improve our malware protection, we need to back up. Well, how do we actually do this? How do we put this into practice? Where's the guidance and support that helps us? So this leads us to something that we're doing at the University of Nottingham and some of our partner universities. I'll talk about this. A 2.5-year UKRI, UK Research and Innovation funded project, which we're abbreviating to call ICOCOS. So it's led by us in partnership with Queen Mary University in London and the University of Kent, and a range of external stakeholders. They will be on the slide in a moment. So what we're aiming to do with this project, the first phase is really to understand the problem a bit better. So to look at the support needs of SMEs. So what do they feel they need support with? Where can they turn to get it? What are the various sources of advice? And how well do those sources of advice match up to the SME's expectations? So what I was saying then about how they feel and those various sources, even in summary there that I found, my suspicion is that this is only going to be taking them so far, but we're going to investigate this in far more detail. Then, somewhat prejudging what we might find as a result of this, looking to see if we can introduce a further means of support for them. So not a replacement, because there are plenty of good sources of information, but we want to improve the potential for that information to reach the SME audience and for them to be supported in understanding how to take action from it. So here are the academic investigator team. There's this chap on the end there, Fennell, using a different, more up-to-date photo than you'll have seen on the conference website, which looks a bit more like me, but even then, not entirely. And then the two more photogenic members of the team, Maria from the University, Queen Mary University of London, and Jason from the University of Kent. So we're all involved in, well, we propose and we're guiding the research. And then we've got all these partner organisations that are contributing to it as well. So we've got the UK Home Office, who have a fair interest in trying to ensure that the business community are protected against cybercrime and forms of attack. We have something called the IASME Corporation. Now, IASME is the delivery partner for the National Cyber Security Centre's Cyber Essentials scheme. Remember I mentioned Cyber Essentials? IASME are the organisation that help organisations get it. We've got CISEC, the Chartered Institute for Information Security, so a professional body. We've got ISC2, you've heard of ISC2 potentially. They are a major certification provider. Anybody heard of CIS? Certified Information System Security Professional. So they provide various certifications. They've got one that's particularly relevant that they've introduced for this, that would be useful in this project. I was going to say they've introduced for this project, not introduced it for this project, but this project will use it. I'll come to that. We've got the Centre for the New Midlands, which is in my region of the UK, so they've got access through them to the SME community. Then we've got three things called cyber resilience centres. So we've got the Eastern one, which covers the region that Jason and the University of Kent are in. We've got the Cyber Resilience Centre for the East Midlands, which covers myself in Nottingham, and the Cyber Resilience Centre for London, which covers London. Now, all of these, they're basically operated by local police forces, and they exist to provide guidance for the business community on what they ought to do to increase the cyber resilience of their businesses. So it's a partnership between police, industry and academia in each of the regions. So they already exist to provide support, and SMEs can access these, but perhaps the level of capability that they would have if they were inundated with requests would be limited. So we perhaps need means to get the support out more generally. So we have this project. And this is how it breaks down in terms of work package structure. It's the most exciting thing I thought I could present to you at a conference is a set of work package labels. So we've got work package 1, which we don't care about, it's just project management, that happens. Then the two things we're doing at the start of the project, investigating SME support needs and awareness. So engaging with the SME community, essentially surveying and interviewing them to find out a little bit more about, well, what do they do when they've got a cyber security question or concern? How often does this happen to them? Are they actually engaging with the topic at all, or are they sticking their heads in the sand potentially? So looking at the picture from their perspective to build upon what we can sort of infer from the breaches survey and other things that are already around, but to get more detail. And then in parallel with that work package 3, to analyse the advisory sources. So the sort of things I put on the slide, but also other things. So, you know, do they, or what would we find if we went to the Cyber Resilience Centre? What would we get if we were an SME going to an organisational action fraud? What would we get if we tried to contact retailers to ask them to guide us? What about if we contacted internet service providers, or if we looked at the major technology companies? Websites, direct contact, face-to-face meetings. What's an SME likely to find if it goes via different routes to get advice? What's the level of advice? How consistent is it? What's the quality of it to some degree? From that, we then want to try and take a deeper look. And this assumes we can get some SMEs to collaborate with us nicely, to actually track what we're calling their support journey. So over a period of months, developing some more particular case studies about, okay, they have a cybersecurity incident or question, something happens within the organization. Let's get them to track for us what they actually do about it. So rather than, let's say in work package 2, where it's a retrospective survey of what they can recall doing in the past, now we want to actually track what happens when they try and seek advice. How far do they get? Do they get to a successful outcome? If there were barriers, what were they? Why did they happen? Etc. Now, all of that, we're sort of then, as I say, prejudging something of the outcome, that there's going to be some constraints in the way that things currently work. And the SMEs perhaps won't understand enough, or they won't know where to start, etc., etc. So what we're looking to do is design and form what we're calling these cybersecurity communities of support, ICOCOs, to make it shorter. So the idea here is to set up localized communities of SMEs and ideally some expertise, some advisory sources, where they can interact with each other and get peer support. Pose questions, ask about, well, you know, I've got this issue, who have you used in the past, have you managed to solve it, etc. So they've got a less formal way than perhaps going to the police or the National Cyber Security Centre, or somebody who's going to charge them money as a security service provider. So they've got an entry point into the subject that feels more accessible perhaps for them. And then the idea then, once we've set these up, and the way that we will set them up involves, well, firstly getting some SMEs to be willing to be part of it, but also doing some upskilling if they're interested in it through something that I'll mention in a minute, ISC2, and also developing a platform for them to use, a so-called support broker, where they'll be able to, within their own cycles, to submit the queries, get the responses, and share intelligence. And then the idea will be, okay, once we've got those foundations in place, to run some regional pilots or localized pilots of different CyCOS communities and see how they actually work in practice. So a couple of building blocks for this. One is Cyber Essentials, because this is what we'll set up as the, if you like, the standard for SMEs to be trying to at least meet this as a baseline. So meeting these 5 areas of technical control, acknowledging that these are not the only areas of cyber security that need to be considered. So remember the 10 steps and how broad they were. But the 5 technical controls within Cyber Essentials, just to spell them out, is to have firewall detection, to have secure configuration, to be doing appropriate update management, installing patches, to have access control in relation to your user community, and to have appropriate malware protection. So we've got IASME as one of the partners. They're the NCSC's delivery partner for Cyber Essentials. So they will be there as a reference point within the project for our SMEs to gain support from. Of course, it still requires effort on the part of the SMEs to have the level of security that enables them to meet this, but they will be guided on how to get there. Then the other building block, and this is an option for our participating SMEs, is to take if they want to build their own internal level of capability, to follow this particular certification. It's a relatively new one from ISC2 called CC, Certified in Cybersecurity. And it covers these areas of cybersecurity. I won't read them all out. But if an SME doesn't have any background in-house in cybersecurity, and they want to understand a little bit more about what it's about, to at least enable them to make more informed decisions about seeking further support, this would help to raise their game. So if they've got an IT particular person within the organisation who might want to build skills around this, this would be good for them to follow. So we've got 100 free places from ISC2 for our participating SMEs. And then, just to remind you what the UK looks like again, the idea is that we'll do some piloting of these communities of support. So, I say the basis will be SMEs identify and share their support needs. We'll put through the communities, they'll have contact with advisory sources. It won't be a commercial undertaking, so it won't be costing them anything. It might cost them something then to act upon some of the advice that they receive. It's not that people who normally charge for services will then be providing everything for free, but it won't be dominated by commercial interests is the idea here. And we're going to try it hopefully via at least 3 pilots. So enabling us to evaluate how well does it work in practice, do SMEs engage with it, does it sustain itself over a longer period, and hopefully leading to a repeatable model that we can then say, okay, if you do these sort of things to build the foundation, this would work and sustain itself more widely. And then that leads to, is it, I'm trying to make it relevant now to talking at an international conference, perhaps the lessons that we learn from it would be applicable beyond the realms of just the UK. I've given you a load of UK specific standards and data, but the fundamental principles here, and particularly ways of engaging SMEs to work together and be a peer community, could well apply more widely. So what are the barriers and enablers, the support journey experiences that we have, the forms of support that are more or less effective for SMEs, and the communities of support themselves. All of the lessons from each of those phases could have some relevance in the international context as well. And I say the CICOS approach, if it works for us, could be an appropriate model for others to adopt more widely. That's what we'd like to think in the longer term. Okay, so finally, he's going to shut up talking. Conclusions. So SMEs, from what we see in the survey, or breaches survey and various other sources, they're increasingly exposed to cybersecurity incidents. The problem hasn't gone away. However, their stance towards it, particularly what we see from the UK breaches survey, has become less effective in recent years. So they're doing less about something where the problem hasn't diminished. Perhaps there's various good reasons for this. The economic context, for example, might mean that priorities are seen elsewhere. Cybersecurity, unless you're faced with an incident, perhaps falls down the priority list, but it's a dangerous game to be in. Advice is available, but the way that it's presented is variable, and the extent to which it's utilised is going to be similarly variable, we think. So SMEs also then need the capability to be able to act upon the advice. Just the advice being there isn't any use if you can't interpret it and understand what you're supposed to do with it. So our CICOS communities, once we get to that, and the project as a whole, enables us hopefully to better understand the situation. Within a year, we'll have some very clear further understanding what the picture looks like. And then within the 2.5 years of the project, we'll have trialled this approach and be able to report upon did it actually work for us and did it make a difference, most particularly for the SMEs involved. If you're interested, if you want to get involved, if you want to keep track of the project, got input to offer, there's another QR code that you can take pictures of. It might, again, lead you somewhere random, or it might, as it's intended to, generate an email to me. Just be aware of what you're about to scan. It's a mail to QR code, and so it's an expression of interest email that will then get sent to me. And I'll sign you up to all sorts of other mailing lists. No, I'll take your email and note your expression of interest. If you put in the message what you'd be interested in, that's even better. It means I don't have to email you back and ask. Other than that, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for listening to me, and happy to take any questions if there are any. Yes.
I have two questions.
Well, you've only got the budget for one, but carry on.
First one being, we've seen that there is a decrease in the measures being taken by SMEs from 2021 to 2023. Why is there such a thing? Because I've seen like there's more awareness, there are more breaches every single day. So why are these SMEs taking less measures? My second question would be, are you aware of any sort of wonderful package? Because I'm thinking of someone who owns an SME, let's say making cookies or something. For them to think of all the 10 steps of cybersecurity, it's a burden of then find which is the best antivirus, which is the best software. Are there, or do you think it's a good idea for it to be like a one sort of company, but of course like one big package? We take care of all your cybersecurity needs.
Okay, two good questions. So I think the answer to the first one, we can't be definitive and absolutely sure about it. But certainly, if you look at the breaches survey, the expectation or the theory around why there's been a drop in the perceived priority is really the economic context. Money is tight. There's less to go around. SMEs are struggling, particularly post-pandemic period, etc. And so, fundamentally, survival of the business is likely to be one of the more pressing priorities overtly for them than, well, what can we do about cyber security? But unfortunately, I think that the fundamental thing is that the two things could end up being linked. If you experience a significant cyber security incident because you've not done one of these fundamentals, your business might not survive for that reason. I'm not trying to sort of spread the sort of fear aspect, but it's fundamentally true that cyber security incidents can have a significant impact as well. And so doing some of these fairly baseline things that are easy to achieve if you're aware of them and know what to do would actually be a significant safeguard. So you're sort of ensuring yourself there. In terms of, can somebody provide the entire solution? I'm sure, if you go and look around in the UK and more widely here in Malaysia, you'll find people say, we'll handle all your cybersecurity needs and we'll, so, many will provide good services. The whole notion of managed security service providers, that's what they're there to do. But I think as an SME particularly, you've got to understand, well, what's the scope of the service that's being provided? What can I rely upon them to be doing and what might they not be covering? So, for example, we'll handle we'll protect you from external threats coming into your organisation. We'll track malware, we'll track phishing messages, etc. But what about things that could then originate within your organisation? So through user unaware, are they going to handle the user awareness and training, for example? If not, then that's still something you might want to consider. So, I think there are, to varying levels, there will be packages and solutions and services that can be bought, but an SME needs to have the knowledge about what's going to be most suitable for its purposes. So it's not to recommend or cast out on any of the services. There's plenty of good stuff there, but it's choosing what's appropriate for you. Any more? Don't know if the online people have any option to ask questions. Nothing in the chat. There's a hand at the back. Or then the microphone view. Look, we can have a sing off now.
We can do it. All right, I'm from the Philippines, and my question is, somehow I am figuring out on how to interconnect on the SME setup in the Philippines. So I do believe that prevention is better than cure in terms of cybersecurity, and majority of the SME setup in the Philippines, the SME owners and also the employees are non-technical folks, and I just wondering, how do you encourage people, the SME involved in SMEs, how do you encourage them to involve with cybersecurity, apply all the notions and also the information about cybersecurity to mitigate phishing and also the negative impacts of it?
Okay, so this is a fundamentally interesting question because, again, they're not cybersecurity experts, they're not even technology experts, and it's very likely not the thing they want to be thinking about at all. And so part of what we're looking at within the project is the extent to which it's on their agenda or not in the first place. So one of the things that we're investigating as part of what I call the Work Package 2 activities is to try and get a reach out into the SME community via the various routes we've got through our contacts and through the partners, to get a sense of, is it on their agenda? To what extent do they consider themselves to be interested in it? but also trying to promote the message that it's something they ought to be interested in. So by virtue of them engaging with, let's say, the surveys and then the interviews, it hopefully generates more of an appetite if they didn't have it. But then trying to say, okay, so how does it work? What are the, in a sense, the buttons to push to get them to want to take action? And within the communities of support, hopefully it's not going to be a panacea. It's not going to mean that suddenly, lots of, what was the business that was mentioned earlier, caught my attention about baking cookies or something. It's not that every cookie baker is suddenly going to have a cyber security enthusiast, but what we would hope is it might give the cookie baker access to other cookie bakers who have considered cyber security, and amongst that group, they might collectively raise their not interest, but their sort of group intelligence about it, and understand, okay, here are some things that I'm doing. Oh, and you're not doing it. Oh, well, he's doing that. I better do that. And so that peer community thing, hopefully working in the right direction. Not they all say, oh, I haven't done anything, I've been bothered by it, and we won't bother either, and then we all sit back and all get breached. That's not what we want. We want it to sort of raise all boats a bit higher, is the hope. But that's part of the research fundamentally. It's knowing in actual fact, I can present it on slides and say, oh yes, we'll revise SMEs, but reaching that community and engaging with them and getting their interest is one of the challenges. So, as an example of the sort of thing we're doing within the project, I've got a meeting with the business community via our university at the start of December to try and promote the issues to them. And so, we're hoping sort of word of mouth and sort of a bit of snowballing might start to get more people involved. But, time will tell and we will see. We're not going to send. It is just the beginning, and hopefully the beginning of a productive journey, but we should find out. Strangers, no, we're not seeing. Yes, hello, there's a hand at the front. Oh, there's multiple hands. There's one there and then one there. Hello.
Hello, my name is Salus Tikiman from Run Cloud. So, very interesting topics and very many insightful data that I got today's. And I already share this with my team, even about the UK security breaches. I think there's a lot of dangerous kind of data, and even like I thought like UK is already secure, then maybe I need to look at how they
actually ignore what I said. The UK is very secure.
Because the moment many end users in Malaysia, the moment they wanted to use the system, they always look up at maybe you need to use some US or European system. Then maybe the confidence in Malaysia to have a good system. So my question is very simple, which is many SMEs and many industries nowadays are towards more stringent toward the data security. Of course, the first layer is basically the password. How even the admins can easily put the ending 123 for the important system to access. And what do you see, and what is your point of view as far as now it's becoming a lot of SaaS in doing password management, like LastPass, One Security, Bitwarden, and many others security password managers. So how do you see? Because at least in the second quarter, I received the information of LastPass. One of the trusted password managers has been breached. So even I've used LastPass, even till now, and then I'm thinking of switching to other password managers. And I was thinking that am I like paranoid to not using the password managers and using your maybe put my hands and right? So for me, being digital is good, but how far that we can trust to third party, and what is your advice for SMEs or maybe industries like that? Thank you.
Okay, so not necessarily an easy question, right? It does come down to your risk appetite and what you're willing to trust and where you're willing to trust it. So would I advocate using password managers or some means of managing your passwords? Yes, because if we just rely on us and our ability to generate and remember multiple passwords for multiple systems, we don't seem to be very good at it. And I'm now going to do another of those hands up things. How many of you in the room think you use strong passwords on all of your valuable systems?
You are false.
Yes, you might be on some of them. You might not really. But a few hands went up. What's a strong password then?
Birthday and pet names.
Yes. Birthday and pet names. Yes. That's established. Not. No. People in the room, you can see I'm joking. So yeah. So I think what you've done now is you've sort of scratched a little itch for me with passwords, because I mentioned those 360 papers, about 350 of them are password related things in terms of studies looking at the extent to which people are or aren't supported in understanding what good practice looks like with passwords. So many sites and services require us to use them. Quite considerably fewer of those sites and services guide us on how to do it properly. So as you mentioned, there's lots of sites that require, they say, use a strong password. Your password isn't strong enough. They don't tell you what strong password is. They just tell you, it's weak. Choose a better one. Well, what's a better one look like? How is it text name and don't know, it's not. But you might get away with it on some sites, because the other thing is, and if you look at, NordPass each year publish a list of the 200 most common passwords. And in 2022, the most common password was?
No password.
Password. The word password. And back in 2012, if I remember rightly, the most common password was password as well. And every year in between, it was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now, to me, that suggests a problem. And it doesn't necessarily mean it's the problem with the people choosing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 or password, because we know we've got a good couple of decades worth of evidence that people, when given the option to choose passwords, will think they're being clever by choosing the word password, or they've chosen to choose at least a 6-character password, which many websites still require as a minimum. What 6 characters? What 6 characters can I have? 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. No, that's it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's a great password. And then the website lets them do it. And that's the problem. It's not just that they're choosing a bad choice and that they think it's acceptable to do it. It's that the site or the service or the system allows that choice to be made. Because with so much evidence that these bad choices get made, why on earth are we still in implementing systems allowing that to happen? And then moreover, so you go to these sites, there's numerous websites that will give you examples of this. They will tell you, in response to you putting in a password they don't like, oh no, you're meant to have numbers and letters and special characters. But they didn't tell you that in advance. They only tell you it in response to you putting in something that's wrong. Or, oh no, it's meant to be 8 characters long. Well, how was I supposed to know that before I typed in 6 characters? And so all this thing about guiding and supporting the user to understand what good practice looks like is often neglected. So going back to the question, password managers help us to actually do this more effectively. So a good password manager can suggest for us a decent password. They can store it securely, hopefully as long as it doesn't get breached in some way, and they can manage those passwords so that we don't have to remember them, but they can get auto-populated onto our systems when we access stuff. And so it removes a lot of the burden for us. We're not good at managing all of this. The technology can help. However, there is nonetheless that issue of, do you trust the password manager to be keeping hold of your passwords? Is it likely to be exposed? I mean, to be honest, if you've chosen a bad password, you don't need something to get compromised with to be exposed. That password will get breached anyway. So it's really a judgment. You can manage your passwords in different ways. You can manage it in a password manager on the cloud, on your device. What are you willing to, how far are you willing to allow your passwords to transit out of your direct control versus the usability of allowing that to have happened? So I say it's a personal decision, it's an organizational decision when it's deployed there. But I would also suggest, we don't want to be just relying on passwords on their own anyway. We've got multi-factor authentication, 2-step verification, whatever you call it. There are additional safeguards that can be employed. And again, lots of websites now allow us to do that for all these sort of individual personal accounts that we have, but we're not steered towards them by default. They're there as an option buried in the profile settings or something on the website quite often. but you need to find it. You're not led to it. You're not encouraged to use it. The exception perhaps is things like banking services where they insist on you using it and they introduce something that's rather quite difficult to use in the first place, but that's another story. All right, I rambled on for that one quite a while. You had a question there.
Yeah.
Hey, there we go.
Sorry, my background is not in cybersecurity, but my question comes from curiosity. So far, we have looked at the organization itself, SMEs, and we proposed, as you said, cyber essentials and these things. We looked at specifically at SMEs. What about the criminals? For example, in deterrence theory and behavioral research, they look at the population and they identify or predict people who are likely to commit a crime in the future. And they provide strategies for them to. I'm curious, can we do the same for SMEs? For them to identify a set of maybe competitors, people who will con them in the future, and they can predict something from this and develop a strategies. If you use the same thing now in cybersecurity as an analogy in boxing, for example, you're teaching the SMEs just to defend themselves, not to attack. So is there anything we can do to help them in this regard?
So I think the gist of some of what you're asking is around essentially threat intelligence and again risk analysis. So an SME needs to understand perhaps about, well, what does its, I hate the term, but threat landscape look like? Where is it likely to face problems from? And when it actually looks at it in the round, well, could it be from competitors trying to do something? Is it what we'll call the random incidents of what happened just because malware and phishing things are out there? Is it that they could be targeted because they're in a supply chain for XYZ other organizations? Actually looking at that situation would certainly give them some insights and some perhaps then justification and understanding as to why and where they ought to be. If they haven't got unlimited resources, where would they be best targeting their investments in security? I think it still comes down to a defensive aspect because you're not sort of talking about attacking back, you're not talking about being the aggressor in that context. So you use a boxing analogy, well, they're not going to be punching back at the attackers, but equally they do want to know what the best defensive posture is going to be, I would say. So you look at how your attacker is behaving and you know how to defend better or what you're going to defend against. And I think there's also a thing, within the context of the overall ecosystem and supply chains, if we think about that, sort of going away from what SMEs ought to do, there is a potential argument that larger organizations have a stake and a role to play in this as well. So if you realize that you've got, as a large organization, various SMEs within your supply chain, maybe you are dependent upon and you're sharing data with, etc., then perhaps there's a role that you might be able to play with a greater degree of cybersecurity capability in-house to actually help those within your supply chains up their game. So again, because they're quite important to you as a supplier in some form, you've got a vested interest in ensuring that their cybersecurity is up to a suitable grade as well. So just an additional thought thrown in, and that's again something we might see coming through in these communities of support. So larger organizations playing a role because they know they've got the knowledge and expertise that might help SMEs. So the communities needn't just be SMEs talking to each other. So saying, well, I don't know what to do. No. So having some injection of actual expertise from other places could fit well. So I rambled off the point there, but I do that because I'm old and I love rambling. Any other questions? Anybody fancy a duet? I've got the microphone now. Sing along. Don't do any songs.
Make a fancy song for security.
Oh, we could. Security anthem. I can't think of one now. Put me on the spot. There's always talk about singing. I can't sing and I can't think of lyrics. Other than that, we're sorted. Would you like to sing one? Oh, there's another hand up. Go on. Do you want the microphone?
It's fine, I think.
Oh, you're getting it anyway.
All right, hi. Myself and I think a few of us here are doing research towards like things like AI and cybersecurity. When it comes to adaptation in terms of the industry, how have you seen it so far? Whether it's SME or larger public corporations, are there more, I don't know, like dark traces doing it, for example, but are there really like a surge in the cybersecurity industry to the use of AI and deep learning, etc.?
Yeah, I mean, fundamentally, there has, as the AI and machine learning technology itself has advanced, the opportunities for that to be used in terms of cybersecurity has also advanced. So that the whole threat detection, anomaly detection, all of this sort of stuff, the profiling, understanding what normal looks like, sort of spotting patterns that could be threatening, and the build-ups of behaviours. All of that is useful, or AI, machine learning in particular, can be usefully applied in that context. So the whole thing about identifying, the build-up of online threats, malware, etc. So I think the internet security companies have been sort of tuned into this for quite a while. So yeah, as the overall technology advances, it has the potential to advance for both sides. Is the sort of double-edged sword bit to that. Oh, one further hand up there.
Yeah, just a quick one.
Go on.
Along your journey as in this space, that security space, have you ever had to the complex system? Other than your wife Facebook account?
You say that? No. No, I'm all about trying to advise and defend. I don't actually do anything. I just stand at the front of things and tell the other people what they ought to be doing. So no, not in that context.
Okay, I think we have to stop now. Otherwise, more questions.
Oh yeah, we're 10 minutes past the end, everybody. You shouldn't have kept me talking.
Anyway, thank you very much, Steve, for having these sessions. Very fruitful. I mean, I get something. But I have one question actually.
So we're passing it, and he's got the microphone. So yes.
Nowadays, even though we can see all these decreasing awareness, they know about this, but they it seems don't care actually. It is just because of the new world. They love to share their life because you can see the teenagers right now. I mean, if they can, they would like to have sharing their sessions live to the audience, to the world. So they don't even bother about keeping all these secrets anymore. What do you think?
Yeah, and I suppose it sort of harks back to what Zuckerberg said about a decade ago, that privacy is dead, or whatever he wanted to say, when Facebook was getting criticised for all the open data that was on their users' profiles. I think it's an issue. Yeah, we've got a generation that's growing up not understanding about the potential risks really of sharing information, but at every opportunity being given the chance to share it. And okay, that you might say that's just their personal data and they're putting themselves at risk, but that same mentality, that culture, if we want to think about it, that's what organizations are going to be employing as their next generation workforce. So yes, I fundamentally think we shouldn't allow young people to work now, and all the employment should go to the older generation because we're safer. Or we need to try and ensure that the generation coming through is better informed about the risks of the technology and understands the distinction between sharing their data and sharing that belongs to other people and their organisations. So we might not moderate individuals' behaviours and what somebody chooses to share about themselves, but we don't want that practice transferring into organisations and their data being exposed in similar ways.
Yeah, I think in the next 10 years it will become a culture for everybody to share. Okay, I think that's all. That ends our session this morning. Thank you very much, Steve, for the presentation. Okay, I think that's all for today's sessions. I mean, this morning session. So we're going to have another sessions on the afternoons. Start at 2 o'clock. Okay. Are we going to have a lunch downstairs? And we're going to have a lunch downstairs. Thank you very much. Again, see you this afternoon.
Thank you very much. No problem. Where's that one? Right.